Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started since it is just a little after 6, and I want to respect your time. Um, Welcome, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Drembus, and I'm the genealogist with the William and Mary Bray School Lab. In service to the Bray School Lab's mission of uncovering, documenting, and preserving and disseminating the history and the legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, we host a monthly series on Zoom in order to share recent genealogical findings, engage the descendant community in this work in order to broaden our understanding of those legacies, and enlist the help of historians, genealogists, as well as the general public in furthering the conversations and the research surrounding the Williamsburg Bray School. The title of the monthly series is Bray School Stories, and this evening's focus is Standing in the Gap, the use of historical context in the Bray School research. So first, some housekeeping items. Once again, we are recording this session. It'll be available later on our YouTube site. To find it, simply Google Bray School Lab YouTube. If you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this later from our YouTube channel. I am joined this evening, I'm so excited, I'm joined this evening by Daniel Pleasant, one of our wonderful student thought partners in the Bray School Lab. I'm excited that he's going to share about the work that he has been undertaking and really kind of show you one of these new, show you the project he's been working on. Our monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation. I will share a slide or two and then some information and then pause to get your feedback, your questions, and invite you to share your thoughts and your comments on it. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I don't know whether Maureen is here with us this evening yet. Maureen, are you here? Can you see her, Nicole? I can't access the...
I don't see her yet,
I
but
knew she was going to be scrambling. Okay, I'm going to do my best to talk about the upcoming events, even though I don't have a lot of information on them. But we do want to mark calendars for our annual Descendants Week. This year it's going to be April 21st to the 26th. And this has been just a lovely way for us to get together with our descendant community to bring them up to speed on kind of what the latest happenings have been in the previous year, and also have some family friendly activities for the younger people in the descendant community. So be on the lookout in Bray School Bulletins, the weekly newsletter. If you are a descendant community member, it's going to be April 21st to the 26th. I'm not sure. Hey, Teddy, how are you? I just see you. So it's going to be April 21st to the 26th. I don't know that the calendar of events has really been fully pulled together just yet, but stay on the lookout for that. That's going to be in April. And some events will happen online, I believe, and then some will be in person. The other thing we wanted to bring to your attention is a call for proposals. We have our annual Slate seminar each fall. It's going to be in October, and we would love for people who are engaged in this research and engaged in Bray School stories and engaged in just the history of the Williamsburg Bray School, whether you're a descendant community member, a student thought partner. If you are interested in submitting a proposal to present at the Slate seminar, we are opening up proposals now, and they're going to be due April 18th. So you have a little bit of time to think about it. I would imagine that there's going to be an email that you could send, but for the moment, let's go with the Bray School Labs email address to send those proposals to. But again, keep a lookout on Bray School's bulletins, the Friday weekly newsletter, for more information about both those events. But does anybody have any questions that hopefully I'll be able to answer about either of those things? Maureen, yay.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, you did great.
Okay.
Let me just add to particularly the let me start with the call for proposals that did go out with I think the last Bray School bulletins that will continue to go out. There are multiple themes. First and foremost, continuing on topics related to the history and legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School and its students, but also 2025 marks a number of important anniversaries. It's the 250th anniversary of Lord Dunmore's proclamation, offering freedom to those who would fight on the side of the British during the American Revolution. That proclamation leads to the creation after the Revolution of the Book of Negroes, the registration of Blacks leaving New York. So that's an important anniversary. 2025 also marks the 250th anniversary of the foundings of a number of branches of the U.S. military. The Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps all celebrate anniversaries of foundings in 2025. So we're also in the call, also looking for people who are interested in talking about the history of military service among local community members. And then finally, it is a year of the environment at William and Mary. So also looking for proposals that shine a light on interactions with the environment, whether looking at the history of oystering, farming, sustainability. It's really broad, it's really broad in that sense. And all that information is outlined in the call and also in the form that will be submitted for the proposal process. Descendants Week will be a little different. Our town hall will be on Tuesday. That will be the 22nd. And yes, the calendar still has to be shaped up. It's going to look a little different. We have some interesting things to share when we get some of them nailed down. It's a little too soon to share them, but we look forward to sharing soon.
Thanks, Maureen. Any questions about either of those things that we might be able to answer at this point? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started on this evening. So historical context, what are we talking about when we talk about that? It can be a lot of things. It's basically putting our ancestors in a time and a place and really understanding what's going on around them and what are they living in, what are they living through, and what kind of setting are they living in. It's really helping us understand and appreciate what our ancestors lived through and how they may have handled perhaps difficult circumstances, and depending on where they're living, there could be local history going on that's influencing some of their choices and their decisions. There could be national things happening that are also having an impact on their lives. And so it's always interesting to kind of keep those things in mind. I mean, I think about my descendants, our descendants now. What will our descendants say about what we have witnessed and what we are living through, whether that's a pandemic 4 years ago, other things that have happened prior to this year, or even the current times that we're living in right now. What impact do all of these things around us have on us today that our descendants will be looking and wondering how we lived through, what we lived through, and how that may have changed some courses of action, or how that may have had an impact on just some decisions that we make for our livelihood. So this is broadly what we're talking about when we talk about historical context. And so I want to touch on just 3 aspects of that before I turn the presentation over to Daniel. But that's broadly what we're looking at when we talk about historical context. So one of the things when we're really researching the Williamsburg Bray School and the scholars, we have to keep in mind what was going on with the Virginia slave laws. And these are just some of the years that I pulled because we keep these things in mind as we're going forward, because we have to understand what the law was at that time and what the students and their families, what law were they living under. And we talk about in 1667, when baptism doesn't alter the state of somebody who's free or enslaved. And that was that was really what the Bray Association leaned heavily on, to encourage enslavers to send the children to the school, because they wanted to assure them that the children were going to still, this wasn't going to change their status. They were going to make them Christians, but it wasn't going to change their status by going to the school. And then there were laws about when people could be set free and when they couldn't. And so we have to think about where do certain families, say like the Ashby family, fall under which kind of condition, and which law was, what was happening at certain times and when decisions were being made. So we talk about in 1723 that people could not be set free except by the okay with the governors, the governor's okay. And we see that when Matthew Ashby has managed to purchase his children and his wife from Samuel Spur, but then he has to go to the council to get permission, essentially, to make them free, to have them be free. And he does get that. But if we didn't understand what the law was, we wouldn't understand what that record was, and what we were looking at and trying to understand that. We think about 1782, where all of a sudden it changed, and it was lawful for enslavers to free their enslaved household by a last will and testament. This changes things drastically. And Mr. Levine and I were just talking earlier about Dennis, and we were talking about Robert King Carter and how he emancipates a huge number of his, all of his enslaved population. Now, of course, that didn't happen instantaneously. It was a gradual emancipation. But after that, the law changed again because all of a sudden the General Assembly realized, whoa, we can't have that happen ever again. So these laws are these laws are reactionary. And so some of these laws that you see being, taking place or being passed are very much in reaction to an unintended consequence that perhaps the people in charge didn't anticipate. And so, and I bring up 1785 and 86. This is right in that time period when Isaac B. was called into that court case to serve as a witness. And so he could, in August of 1785, serve as a witness because the people who were being charged with insurrection were in fact people of color. And then all of a sudden you see in 1786, a year after his that court case, where they had to really be very careful about what the justices were, what kind of law the justices were going to be under. So these are just some examples. And of course, 1831 is when we start to see that anti-literacy kick in. And this is 50 or 60 years later, after the Bray School has been in existence, after children were explicitly being taught to read and to spell. You have this complete shift. And again, these laws are, these are changing, and these are reactionary. And these are the laws that the children who went to the Bray School and grow up to be adults, this is the world that they are living under. And so we need to kind of make sure that we keep in mind what the laws were at certain time periods. And any thoughts, any questions, any comments before we go forward to the next one? Okay, I'm going to go ahead on to, so with that, we've covered kind of laws. The other thing that we look at is what's happening within the government structure and what's happening politically. And Daniel's going to do a great job kind of talking about this. So I'm only just going to bring this slide up just to kind of, kind of set the stage. But we do need to think about, we need to remember that for the Williamsburg Bray School scholars, they're living in the capital of the Virginia colony. It is the place to be. It's where the center of political turmoil is happening. I know there's things happening in Philadelphia and in Boston and New York, but for Virginia, Williamsburg is kind of that hotbed of ideas that are being espoused. And so we had to remember, what was this government structure? We had a governor's council, a House of Burgesses, a general court. The church and the state are essentially one. And so we need to kind of keep in mind what the government structure was like and politically what was happening during that time period. And I'm just going to stop there because I know Daniel's got a lot to share about that. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is really looking at the culture of what the children were experiencing on a daily basis. You know, what kind of setting they were in determined the type of labor that they were performing. People always ask us about, you know, oh, were they, you know, slaves in the tobacco fields? Well, a lot of the Williamsburg Bray School students, for the most part, were very much in an urban setting, and they were doing things in town that things much more domestic skills within these households. Also have to remember, this is during the Enlightenment period. One aspect of the Enlightenment period was religious freedom and tolerance. And how does that compare with what the Bray School scholars are learning at school? And other ideas from the Enlightenment period, ideas such as equality under the law or the consent of the governed. Are they hearing these phrases? They're seeing these broadsides, they're hearing these conversations in the taverns. And so this is the context under which they're operating. And who are they seeing? What's the population like in Williamsburg? Over 50% of Williamsburg's population are people of color. So they are seeing people who look like them. What was happening in their family life? What kind of traditions were being shared? The students were born in Virginia. Yes, Teddy, you got a hand raised. What can I do?
Yes, I was going to say the Bray School students, having learned to read, having learned to write, they probably also, without even knowing it, they're having independent thoughts about from what they're seeing and hearing around them, and then and what they're feeling. So they now begin to have independent thinking. That would put them at odds with everybody.
Right. Yeah. They're taking agency.
And that's it's
You know?
not it's, you know it's not funny. What happened to me was this: because I I I I kind of go to the left and everybody else is going to the right. So I could just see all these Bray School students, they're all going to the left and everybody else is like, what? Who are not having their mind opened up. Right?
Right.
They're not having their mind opened up. So I
Right.
could see that could be a difficult thing for you to be a enslaved person or a black person, a Negro, or Indian slave, in a period of enlightenment.
Right.
It would be a very difficult thing.
Right.
So that's what
Where do they fit in on this?
Yeah.
You know, and how can they take agency in that setting? Yes. And how would they make sense of what they were hearing at school and then versus what they were hearing at home and also what they were hearing out in the, you know, in the town? You know, there's a
Yes.
lot of ideas being thrown out there and they're sponges. I mean, children are sponges anyway, even nowadays. They're taking all this information in and then they're going to make sense of it for themselves. And so so it's interesting to think about them in a context, not just a name on a list, but what was their living like? And so one of the things we are doing is we started a project called the Standing in the Gap Project. And this was a project, and Daniel's going to kind of take it from here, but I'm just going to kind of set him up that this is this QR code will take you to, it's a new mapping project. What we wanted to do is look at the gap in time between 1774, when Ann Wager dies, and 1777, when the school officially closed, when we have that that letter from the Bray Associates. But this is where I'm going to have Daniel kind of take over. But let me stop sharing my screen, but it also looks like somebody's putting something in the chat. Enlightenment had nothing to do with them, right? Thanks, Janice. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Daniel, if you want to introduce yourself and take it from here.
Thank you first and foremost for giving me the opportunity to be here. Like Elizabeth said, I'm Daniel Pleasant. I'm a senior at the university. I've been with the Bray Lab for about 2.5 years, joining in October of my sophomore year. And it's been a blast. I've been working alongside Nicole, Dr. Lee, and just a lot of students coming through the lab. It's been a blast. And throughout my time, the 2.5 years here at the lab, I prioritized my time focusing on the Standing in the Gap project, as Elizabeth had mentioned. Standing in the Gap project looks at the time period between 1774 to 1777, from the death of Anne Wager to the complete cessation of school operations in British North America of the Bray School. And so I'm going to share my screen, and it takes us to. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So just a little bit of overview about the Standing in the Gap timeline. So before I get started, as I mentioned, it's looks at the time period before 1774 through 1777. And the biggest thing about this time period was that 1 year after the death of Anne Wager, the American Revolution starts. So what we see throughout Williamsburg and just throughout America, just in general, we see a bunch of political, military, and economic tension, and especially racial tension going through on all of the colonies. And so to kind of go through the timeline instead of going through every single tab, just going in depth, I kind of wanted to prioritize my presentation in 3 different steps in each of the years. I wanted to look at one slide that had to do with this, the specifics of what happened to the students, or just a set of students during this time period from 1774 to 1777. So it would be we'll look at in 1774, we'll look at Isaac B. And then in 1777, we'll look at a different set of students. And then for the second slide in each respective year, I want to look at domestic tension. How is this exemplified? What events happened that displayed domestic tension? And then finally, I want to look at, as we mentioned, domestic tension. I want to look at how attention was stirred from abroad. And this will be things such as like passing of the Boston Port Act. We'll see Lord Dunmore's proclamation, as Dr. Lee had mentioned earlier. So yeah, I'll get it kicked off. And so I think the best thing to start with, also, this is how the timeline is structured. It goes chronologically from 1774, of course, and it starts through each month. We started in January, as the first event took place then. So I will start with the death of Anne Wager because I feel that that's what everyone is most familiar with. So to kick this off, a lot of the tension starts in August 20th, 1774, or we could say that for like what we see a lot of the tensions happening in Virginia alongside the students, kind of making the connection with the death of Anne Wager. As you know, she was the primary teacher of the Williamsburg Bray School, so her passing was extremely significant to especially just the care of the students and just the organization of the school in general. Because as you'll see throughout this time period, it isn't documented specifically what happens to every single student. So a lot of, I'll say like a lot of events kind of tell where a lot of students could have ended up, such as like the selling of residences, the finding of wills of different residences. So yeah, so started with the death of Anne Wager, and this kind of just exemplifies what's happening with the students directly. So to take this shift to like more of the domestic tensions, I wanted to look at the passing of the Boston Port Act. And so the passing of the Boston Port Act was extremely controversial in America, of course. As we know, this was the start of the coercive acts that led to the, or you can call them the intolerable acts, led to like the Massachusetts Government Act, Administrative Justice Act. And these were all just essentially just a bunch of just kind of harassing taxes and different acts on the American colonists at the time. And it kind of, this is, of course, this is prior to the American Revolution, but it kind of signified that something bigger was to come. We see that there's already been a decrease in the amount of enslaved persons um, in uh, in Britain, and this is kind of going against what the colonies stand for. And so to shift it, looking at the next piece I wanted to go to was the first Virginia Convention, because this is kind of the response to the Boston Port Act. And so the Boston Port Act, as I had mentioned, was a tax. And so this applied to, of course, Boston in general, and the colonies in the upper north British Crown. However, this did impact the colonies as a whole, and the first Virginia Convention was called, and this was sort of like an extra legal body made up of all the different colonies forming in Virginia to assess. There's still continuing support for the British Crown as the American Revolution hasn't yet started. However, they have listed grievances, and it's just essentially just displaying their concern for what's soon to come. And so this is kind of just the spark of just political tension, as we'll see, especially like with Lord Dunmore, his election. We're going to see like the gunpowder incident and just a lot more political and militaristic escalation to go forward. So to look at 1775, I wanted to look at another set of students. And I think I wanted to focus on, I'm pretty sure it was Aggie and Rogers, if I can find that one. Actually, I can just go anywhere because honestly, it's all just like every single student at the Bray School has a history that needs to be told, and so honestly, I could kind of click anywhere. And so we'll look at Mary and Harry, and so we look at Thomas Everard, and he was a member of the Williamsburg Committee and also elected to the Continental Congress. So he was extremely important to the time period. Oh, also, can you see the image in the left? Okay, let's see if I can. Okay, I'll just use Nancy and Davy. I think that's on my computer side why the image wasn't loading. My connection's kind of foggy. But yeah, so we'll look at Nancy and Davy. So as I had mentioned, there's a lot of political tension going on in 1774 to 1777. And with that being stated, even though a lot of the colonists that resided in America were receiving certain taxes and harassment from the British Crown, not everyone was on the side of the colonists in the Virginia Convention. A lot of them still supported the British Crown. And you see that through Edward Charlton. And Edward Charlton was a Williamsburg resident who had two enslaved persons that we know of in the Bray School, Nancy and Davy. And in 1774, we have a copy of his intention to sail for England, but we don't have any information of what happened to Nancy and Davy afterwards. And see, this is where the standing in the gap comes in, because the gap, not only does it stand for the time period, but it just stands for a gap of information that we are missing. And when I mean missing, in a sense that we don't have any actual records through this time period of what happened to Nancy and Davy. So all we can do is just draw inferences on the events that happened before and after. Because it is highly unlikely that Nancy and Davy went across waters with Edward Charlton and his wife. So what we know about them is extremely unknown. And then to go into I also wanted to take a peek at the final letter from the Associates. This was a letter written by Robert Carter Nicholas, and this was just officially just stopping Bray School associations until further notice. And this was following the death of Ann Wager. So this was extremely important as it's kind of solidified the stopping of operations at the Bray School. Yeah. But now to get back to just the overall political tension in Virginia, the most important aspect of tension or most important event that occurred, as Dr. Lee was mentioning, was Lord Dunmore's proclamation. And so let me go to that. And so Lord Dunmore's proclamation was extremely important as it kind of started a new mark or showed like a small glimpse of hope, because Lord Dunmore, while being the governor of Virginia at the time, was for the British Crown. And so despite his efforts to try and maintain the peace within Virginia, um, there were too many things going on that he just couldn't control. Uh, Spring gun, as I had mentioned, the escape of Isaac B. There was just so many things going against him, and so with all the tension happening before and going leading into the American Revolution, Lord Dunmore issued a proclamation that essentially called for called for enslaved persons to join his army, um, in essence to kind of how do I want to phrase this? Well, he was essentially promising or granting freedom to whoever joined his Ethiopian regiment. And we saw thousands and thousands and thousands of just enslaved persons allied to the British military from around 1775 to 1776. And I know I mentioned that it stops in I mentioned that the Standing in the Gap timeline stops in 1777, but I'll get to why we mentioned the 1775 to 1776. And this is because we're going to get to more American Revolution events, such as the abandonment on Gwen Island and stuff like that. And so, actually, to keep going, I'll go to the Fourth Virginia Convention, and it seems like yes, we have skipped 3 conventions. However, they are listed in the timeline. I just don't want to waste everyone's time and go through every single slide. And this was essentially just a response to Lord Dunmore's proclamation right after, um, because as he saw, or as a lot of the colonists who were not on the side of the British Crown, they kind of saw Lord Dunmore's proclamation as a threat to their own safety. And so this kind of raised concerns, and the Fourth Virginia Convention resulted in just like an increased defense and protection, um, as they feared, especially like I had mentioned with the spring gun incident, your enslaved persons with like militaristic weapons. I'd be scared too, especially if, yeah, the Fourth Virginia Convention was in direct. Oh wow. And kind of to keep this going, another response to this was the sale of Lord Dunmore's establishment. And this kind of how I saw it was essentially an exile of Lord Dunmore as he was abroad. And so seeing as Lord Dunmore's proclamation threatened colonists and the Fifth Virginia Convention essentially raising up the defense, the next thing that they thought was kind of in order was just appointing a bunch of commissioners while Dunmore wasn't around to sell his house, um, and essentially everything there. And of course, this property included enslaved peoples, um, none of which were Bray School scholars. But this did kind of point back to the situation happening in Virginia in Williamsburg in a kind of like smaller scale. And it just relates back to what we see just across society as a whole as well. However, we are seeing through enslaved individuals who have not joined um, Lord Dunmore's just Ethiopian regiment and then joined the British Crown. We are seeing other events that are taking place directly in Williamsburg, and I want to look at 2 in general, or 2 in particular. We have the founding of the First Baptist Church, and the founding of the First Baptist Church. Actually, even though this is the photo that we use, the founding of the First Baptist Church wasn't in a physical location. Um, Enslaved persons, and also free as well, that's speculated, were meeting in secret in just various different locations across Williamsburg, as of course there was heightened protection across the city. And of course, if you were caught, there was extreme repercussions. And so prior to getting the physical location, you'd see tens, hundreds, and just different amounts and different people each time showing up to engage in just church traditions, which was extremely important in the African American culture at the time, and extremely prevalent today as well. Um, and so that was extremely important because it kind of showed that since 1774, we're seeing a big jump from the amount of political tension is kind of resulting in kind of an increase of hope for independence and freedom. I don't want to say that because, of course, that is extremely
Yeah, I knew we kind of lost you there for a second. Sorry. It doesn't look like you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Where did I leave off of? What was the last thing that you could hear?
Oh gosh, it was really good. It was how the political tension was introducing also some hope into the
Yeah,
atmosphere. Yeah.
got it. So as I had mentioned, I was saying that the political tension, even though it looked really bleak and dire in the colonies, especially Virginia and Williamsburg, it did result in a glimpse of freedom and hope for enslaved persons all around. As we see with the founding of the First Baptist Church, this couldn't have been even fathomed prior to the start of the American Revolution, as everything was extremely tight knit and extremely securitized, and everything was there was kind of a massive hold on any sort of movement from for enslaved persons, both or just African American individuals, both free and enslaved. And looking at something else, I want to go to the founding of Phi Beta Kappa, which is actually extremely close to the college. And this was a really interesting society, as it was essentially just a makeup of scholars, um, both slave owning and non slave owning scholars, that would meet together and just essentially talked about just critical issues that happened that were happening in the colonies and in Williamsburg in general. And this is kind of weird because the biggest topic of the Phi Beta Kappa society was just the issue of slavery and emancipation of slaves. And of course, it was kind of weird that there's this sort of debate, but there's also slave owning individuals there that are willing to have the conversation with people who are of the opposite side. So I'm not saying that this is some sort of grace to them at all, but like I said, from 1774, we didn't see any sort of progress at all until we saw some sort of political tension stirring up with the American Revolution. But then now looking at 1776, which is just 2 years later, we're seeing conversations with individuals who don't or who are not owning slaves, and individuals who are having slaves, having just, I wouldn't say the courage, but the ability to come together and actually speak on societal issues such as this, something so grand. And then I didn't want to get into the revolution too much, as that's just not the focus of the Bray School. However, it's impossible to talk about the Standing in the Gap project without looking at what happened with the Revolutionary Army. And this is solely because not only did this have a lot of impacts, like I said, on showing glimpses of freedom and independence, but as I had mentioned in Lord Dunmore's region, a lot of the military arsenal that would make up the British Crown and even the colonist army were made up of just African American individuals. And so this is extremely crucial and cannot be left out. And so the one of the final pieces that I wanted to look at in the timeline was just the inoculations in the Revolutionary Army from George Washington. And this was essentially one of the, I wouldn't say one of the ending or closing events of the Revolutionary War or American Revolution. However, this is something that kind of put a halt in the Revolutionary War, as we've seen that um, there had to be some sort of pause, as we saw we saw the spread of smallpox, abandonment of just different regents, and kind of just like there was a bunch of fear going around in the American Revolution, and a lot of controversy and debate around inoculation just to stop the spread of disease. And this kind of brought a halt to the end of the American Revolution. Not the end, but I don't know how I'm trying to state this, but this kind of brought a halt to what was happening in Virginia. Um, and so to end it all off, I wanted to look at, of course, the final slide in the timeline, and this is just an amicable accommodation. And this was essentially just the associates of Dr. Bray announcing the complete cessation of operations until an amicable accommodation took place. And we see um, We see, although, however, like certain like branches of the Bray School opening up in different places, such as Philadelphia, Nova Scotia, and then just other spots in general. Um, the Bray School had not opened back up in Williamsburg, and that was the complete cessation of operations. However, I do want to like kind of shed light on despite the cessation of operations, as I had mentioned, we see the impact that the Bray School had on not only the students of Williamsburg, but we see the impact that it had on the American Revolution. We saw the impact that it had on the condition of enslaved persons. We saw how they were viewed as property in individuals' wills. We saw that they weren't, if people joined the British Crown, such as Edward Charlton, we have no recollection or information of what happened to these enslaved persons. Um, and just the fact that even though all this is happening, that the Bray School still branched out into other locations, such as Philadelphia, places that are not even in America, and just the impact that it's had overall on the Williamsburg community and America as a whole.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a great overview. I'm sure people sparking a lot of conversation. I also wanted to give people a chance to ask you some questions, but I also know that people may be wondering how to get to the story map and how to navigate through it. So if that is something that you are curious about, Nicole is here and can also help us kind of navigate that. So questions for Daniel, or do we want to have a little bit more on the standing of the gap and then open it up to a much broader conversation? What do we feel like? Teddy, do you have your hand up? Or is that from earlier? Oh, yes, absolutely. Very good presentation, Daniel. Really good. So, well, I'll tell you what, while people are kind of digesting everything that they just heard, Nicole, if you want to just kind of maybe guide us through just a little bit of how to get to there, because Daniel, the things that you hit, the highlights were just right on. We didn't want to go through every single scene, but really, really good. Nicole, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. And this ties into the question Christian just asked in the chat, which is, did Daniel design the map? So first, I just want to take a minute to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicole Brown. I am a PhD candidate at William & Mary, and I am, through my graduate assistantship, the William & Mary Bray School Lab Assistant. This is sadly my last semester at the William & Mary Bray School Lab, but it is such an honor to be here with my colleagues and to have had so many years working with Daniel. Some of you may also have had the chance in the past to meet Ethan Miller. He also participated in this project. And this project has been about, Daniel, would you say 2 years in the works to get it to this final product? Which speaks to both the incredible dedication that our student thought partners have, but to your point, Kristen, figuring out platforms and systems to take information that the students create and put them into public-facing open access sources. So one of the first things I did when I joined the lab as the graduate assistant is learn how to do some computer coding, which my father thinks is very funny as a computer programmer, but as a history major was not as easy for me. But we are very, very lucky that there are a lot of software systems online where you can take data that's in a data set, like an Excel spreadsheet, and then transform it into a digital asset. And so the last 3 years, at least one student every year that I've worked with, and I've worked with under the direction of Dr. Elgersman Lee, I've worked with 34 students over the last 3 years. But every year, one student does a digital capstone project. So what that means is they take their research, their knowledge, what they've learned from the last few years, and then we collaborate on the collection of the data and how it's interpreted. And then I either teach the students or collaborate with the students on showing them different tools that are available open access online to turn things into digital products. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you, for accessibility purposes, how to find all of these digital assets on our webpage, including the Standing in the Gap project that Daniel just shared with you. So one of the tools that we've used in particular over the last few years is a system called Night Labs from the University of Chicago. It's a free software system that allows you to do timelines, story maps. If any of you have ever seen Adam and Fanny's World, we use that system. Genially is another system that we've used as well. But essentially, I've learned how to do different coding and different programming across those platforms when students come to me with a project and we collaborate. If you want to find any of them, though, the first place you want to go to is the William and Mary Bray School Lab website. So I have on the screen here the home screen. If you click the down arrow button right here, so you see the down arrow, I'm going to click it. It will take you further down. You can look at all of the names of Bray School students that have been compiled. But what you really want to do is go to the research portal. So you see this little button in the middle that has a magnifying glass. You're going to click on that. When you click on the research portal, this will take you to all of the incredible research and digital assets that the lab has, that the William and Mary Bray School Lab has, that Elizabeth has worked on, Tanya Meredith, our oral historian, has worked on, Dr. Maureen Elgersman-Lee, myself, the students. We really have a lot of different tools and resources for you because it's very important and it is part of the mission and the initiative of the William and Mary Bray School Lab to make things as publicly accessible as possible. Accessibility for us not only means that it's open access to you, but that it's easy to find. And so when we redid our website a few years ago, we wanted you to be able to get to all these resources in less than 2 clicks. So the good news is once you get to the research portal, it will take you really anywhere you want to go. And so if you scroll down and look at the story maps, these are the 3 digital projects that I've had the great honor and pleasure to collaborate on with students like Daniel. So Daniel, I'm so excited. It's been 2 years, but your project is right at the top. And then there's a description underneath each one of them as to how they were created, what you're going to find. And all you have to do is click on the hyperlink. So in this case, if you go, oh, I want to go to the Standing in the Gap timeline, again, to recap, you go to the website, you scroll down to the research button, you click on research, and then you scroll down and you click on the Standing in the Gap timeline. The timeline, again, is a part of a software system created by Night Labs. So what we do is we take all of the research and scholarship. So the first 2 semesters Daniel and I worked together, he and Ethan were just collecting all the information. And I shouldn't say just. It was a massive amount of work on both of their parts. Daniel was looking very much at the local history, and so going through old research reports from the foundation, primary sources, historical records, and then Ethan was tasked to sort of flesh that out with local and national historic events that we could all pair on the timeline together. They then compiled all that research, cited all the research, and then I took all the research and re-entered it into an Excel spreadsheet that I could then code to put into the timeline. So you have Night Labs to thank, Kristen, for the beautiful timeline that we have. There are a couple different things that you'll see when you go to the timeline logistically. One is if you can see where the arrow I'm pointing, if you, perhaps like me, need something to be slightly bigger on the timeline, you can press the magnifying button and it will actually allow you to zoom in on the timeline and get as specific as weeks and days within one another. If you zoom back out, it'll give you a much broader view. And this is useful in particular because some of the timelines through Night Labs can cover centuries. Ours is covering a few years for all the reasons that Daniel explained. This button here will take you all the way to the end of the timeline. This button will take you all the way back to the beginning of the timeline. So if you get lost in the timeline, which sometimes I do myself, there's a way to get to the beginning and to the end. But if you just scroll along the bottom, you can click on any information you're interested in. What you will see is that we've used a similar formatting and language system if you're looking for very specific student information. So I know there was some conversation in particular about Dennis, who was enslaved by Robert Carter III. And so this is actually a perfect example. Any particular entries on the timeline have to do with Bray School students specifically, primary sources related to them. They will say Bray School Scholar or Bray School Scholars. So if you click on that, it will take you to a specific student who we have information about in the written record, within the oral history and material culture record. All of these entries tend to have a less than 400 word entry because we want it to be succinct. But if you want to explore or look at some of the sources that we used for the timeline, you can tend to go to the captions, since we always have an image that goes with the entry. And if you click on these links, they are automatically embedded to take you to some of those primary sources. So if you go, oh, wow, I see on this timeline that Dennis is referenced, and there were lots of references to him in the diary of Philip Vickers Fithian. I'd like to see that. If you go down to the caption, you'll see, oh, to read the diary and see the references, click on this link. And it'll take you to that diary entry. So we've really tried to create this timeline in such a way that it is not only a point of entry to understanding the students and their communities and worlds between the death of Anne Wager and the ceasing of Bray School operations in 1777, but to make it so that you don't have to hunt for these sources. We've compiled all of them for you. So that way you can continue exploring, learning, engaging, and asking questions yourself, either of the primary sources or how we know what we know. So I hope that gives you a really broad overview of how to read the timeline, how to find it. And again, I just want to say thank you in particular to Daniel. I'm so excited and so in denial that you are graduating this semester, but it's been such an honor to work on this project with you.
Yeah, Elizabeth,
Yes,
can I say something?
of course.
Okay,
Please.
thanks. For those of us, first of all, Daniel, that was an absolutely outstanding presentation. I mean, I've been involved in the Bray School for a while, and that was just a really, really outstanding presentation. So thank you very much. But my point I really want to make is that for those of us who are less surprised than Nicole's father about her ability to get around data, I want to tell a quote that I heard a year ago, and it's taken a year for it to all start coming true. A year ago, I heard the CEO of NVIDIA, and I can't remember his name. If anybody knows this, the person who's the head of NVIDIA, say it, but I can't remember his name. Anyway, but he was giving a presentation, and he said, today in the world, there are 30 million computer programmers. 30 million computer programmers in the world, one of whom is now Nicole. But but when he said AI 10 years from now will mean that there are 8 billion computer programmers in the world. In other words, everybody. And I think that watching Nicole try to pretend like she's surprised at how much she's learned and how much she's doing made me think of that quote, because it's a great quote. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Steve. And I agree with you. This is an amazing way to use technology to make the past accessible, right? And Lori, I saw your question. I will drop in the chat the link, because if you yourself want to create a timeline, if you want to create a story map, if you have research that you want to share, these digital platforms really help with that. So I'll place down here in the chat where you can find out more about these software systems.
Oh my goodness. Other questions, other reflections? Thank you so much to Daniel and Nicole for this. I will say I use the information that our students are producing in the lab. It absolutely helps my research. It helps Nicole's, it helps Tanya's research, and the students are just amazing and fun and creative. And hey, could we do this? Or hey, could we do that? So so much thank you to the students that work in our lab, and for really giving that historical context. So we have a few more minutes if people want to reflect on either or ask questions. I open it up to you. What's on your mind? What are your thoughts right now on this? Nobody?
Hey, Elizabeth, I will just say a little something.
Okay.
And that is, again, since you began with context, when we set the Standing in the Gap project as a project for the lab a few years back, it was in response to the question, which was in some ways rhetorical, but other ways not. The question of why did the Bray School not reopen after the death of Ann Wager? So I thought, and we as the lab collectively thought about that, and that's really where the standing in the gap came from, the need to stand in the gap between 1774 and 1777 and answer that very real question. And I think Daniel and um, other students in their absence have done an amazing job. So I just wanted to say that.
I agree. I agree. And all this information is just the fact that it's available for everybody to just play around with it, take a look at it on the website and think about where your ancestors are in this timeline, or maybe not even in this timeline, but other timelines, and what can this help kind of bring to life, put a little bit more meat on those bones of just names and dates and places. So we are getting to just close to 7, unless anyone has any questions.
I did.
Sure, go for it, Teddy.
You know what? Looking at Daniel, where is he? Daniel, looking at that timeline and what was going on in the world, what was going on in the Bray School world, I was just thinking, why did they not get another teacher? I must have missed something. So I'm going to go back and read some of your some of the correspondence, because I was just thinking, why didn't they just get another teacher and continue the Bray School?
Right.
Mhm.
I think,
I
yeah,
mean,
go ahead, Daniel, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, I mean, that's an amazing question. Um, I do feel like one thing that Nicole had told me when I had first entered the Bray Lab, it was kind of a pretty funny joke. Not a joke, it was realistic. But she had mentioned how if you look at a lot of the occupations of a lot of individuals from this time period, they would have um the different occupations, like your doctor could be your barber, like
Oh
your
yeah.
teacher could be like an apothecary, and just so much more. So that could have been one thing. I mean, I know a lot of people have just a lot of different just jobs and occupations, but also I think a lot of the political tension and a lot of like the governmental issues at the time, especially just in the city of Williamsburg, we see like the
Yes.
first Virginia convention and stuff happen. I feel like a lot of just the focus was away from the Bray
Mhm.
School. And a lot of the focus just was on handling the events happening within Virginia and just the colonies as a whole.
Thank you for that, Daniel. Yeah. I'm going to reflect. I'm going to do some more research, some more reading.
There's always more to do, right?
There's always more to
There's
do.
always more to learn. Exactly. Well, folks, I wanted to thank, unless there any other last minute, anybody else want to say any other last comment? I appreciate all the comments that have been left in the chat, and just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you to Daniel. Thank you to Nicole. Just really fantastic. Knocked it out of the park. And we're excited to have you all be a part of this journey. We do keep calling it a journey, and it is. We will be back. Let me check. There's just a few more messages. Great. Good. We will be back with a new session next month, Monday, March 31st, same time, 6 o'clock. So be on the lookout for advertisements about that in your weekly bulletins as well as on social media. But please stay in touch with us. If this has sparked some thoughts, some questions, always feel free to email me or the lab. We're happy to hear feedback and also hear just kind of how the work is kind of sitting with you all. For the latest news and happenings from the William and Mary Bray School Lab, be sure to check out our website and sign up to receive our weekly emails. And thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you for being here.